In Lafayette Park, Marcus Harris, a Vietnam veteran, seeks solace on his usual bench, a quiet refuge from his past. But tension erupts when police officers, led by Officer Riley, misjudge him, their suspicions fueled by prejudice. As their K-9 Max lunges forward, the park braces for tragedy. Yet in a stunning twist, Max doesn't attack. He nuzzles Marcus, sensing a shared understanding of survival. This unexpected connection halts the confrontation, leaving onlookers and officers questioning their assumptions. What happens next will redefine compassion and challenge everything they believe. Will this moment spark lasting change? Join Kyo Incredible Stories to uncover more tales of unexpected connection. Subscribe now to support our mission of sharing stories that inspire empathy and break down barriers. Share this story if you believe compassion can transform communities. Type understanding to show you value real human connection. In the ceaseless pulse of urban life, where hurried footsteps and distant sirens weave a restless tapestry, some carry burdens unseen by the casual eye. Marcus Harris, a man weathered by time and trials, had carved out a fragile haven in Lafayette Park, a verdant escape nestled within the city's concrete embrace. Each afternoon, he claimed his weathered stone bench, where sunlight spilled gently, as if honoring his quiet presence. For Marcus, this spot was more than a seat. It was a sanctuary, a place where the world's clamor softened and he could breathe amidst the ghosts of his past. Marcus, an African-American veteran, bore the weight of decades in his broad shoulders and silver-flecked hair. His eyes, deep and guarded, held stories no one in the park could fathom. Memories of Vietnam's jungles, where death lurked in the humid air, behind every shadow tree, in every crack of gunfire. As a United States Marine, he had faced horrors that left scars no metal could heal, wounds that whispered to him in the stillness of sleepless nights. Returning home, he found a nation that didn't always know how to welcome its warriors, especially those who looked like him. Yet, in Lafayette Park, Marcus discovered a rhythm that soothed his soul. The laughter of children chasing each other around ancient oaks, the soft coos of pigeons pecking at crumbs, the sight of young couples strolling hand in hand along winding paths. It all felt like a balm, a reminder that life persisted, even for a man who sometimes felt like a relic of a forgotten war. His routine was sacred, a ritual etched into the fabric of his days. Same bench, same hour, same quiet vigil. Marcus had become a fixture in the park, known yet unknown to its regulars. To them, he was the gentle figure who scattered crumbs for pigeons, with a patience that seemed almost reverent, who offered a fleeting smile to a passing child, but never disrupted their carefree games. He had mastered the art of being present, yet invisible, a skill honed by years of navigating a world that often overlooked or misunderstood him. In his solitude, Marcus found peace, a delicate truce with the memories that haunted him. He watched the park's daily theater unfold. Students sprawled under sprawling branches with books, joggers weaving through dappled shade, elderly couples sharing stories on nearby benches, and felt for a moment tethered to the living world. But on this afternoon, the park's harmony fractured. A group of police officers entered, their boots striking the earth with a deliberate cadence. They weren't responding to a crisis, merely asserting their presence, their eyes scanning the park with clinical precision. To them, this was routine, cataloging faces, assessing behaviors, deciding who belonged and who didn't in this shared space. Marcus, lost in his thoughts, didn't notice their approach at first. He was remembering a particular dawn in Vietnam, the way the light broke through the canopy, a fleeting beauty before chaos erupted. The memory held him, as it often did, in a quiet grip of reverence and pain. When the officers' gazes landed on Marcus, the air shifted, charged with an unspoken tension. To them, he wasn't a veteran seeking solace, a man who'd served his country at great cost. He was merely a figure on a bench, an anomaly in their mental map of who should occupy this park. Their whispers, low at first, grew sharper, laced with suspicion. Marcus felt the change before he saw it, a prickle at the back of his neck, an instinct honed in battle. He lifted his eyes, meeting theirs, and in that moment, a silent chasm opened. He saw not curiosity or respect, but judgment, a familiar weight that had followed him since his youth. through war and into this very park. The officers' voices hardened, their questions pointed. "What are you doing here?" one asked, as if Marcus's stillness was itself a crime. His heart sank, not from fear but from the exhaustion of being misread yet again. He wanted to tell them about the bench, about the pigeons, about the way the park's rhythm kept his memories at bay. But words felt futile against the wall of their assumptions. Passersby slowed, some drawn by curiosity, others by unease, their glances darting between Marcus and the officers. The park, once alive with carefree sounds, now held its breath, as if bracing for a storm. Then came the growl, low, commanding, unmistakable. Max, the police canine, strained against his leash, his eyes locked on Marcus. The sound sliced through the tension, amplifying it. Marcus froze, not out of guilt, but from a bone-deep memory of sudden threats, of moments when a single misstep meant life or death. His mind flickered to the jungle, to the snap of a twig that could signal ambush. Yet, he remained still, his hands visible, his gaze steady, refusing to give them the reaction they seemed to expect. In that suspended moment, no one could know what was coming. Not the officers, confident in their authority. Not the onlookers, caught between fear and fascination. Not even Marcus, whose heart beat with a weary resolve. What unfolded next would not only alter the course of one man's day, but would ripple outward, challenging perceptions, exposing truths, and redefining what it meant to see another's humanity. In a city that rarely paused, this small corner of Lafayette Park was about to bear witness to a story of compassion born from conflict, a testament to the fragile, enduring power of connection. The sharp bark sliced through the air, transforming the park's casual hum into a tense electric silence. Visitors froze, their instincts kicking in as they retreated, some shielding their eyes as if bracing for a blow, others stealing glances with the grim familiarity of those who'd seen such scenes play out on late-night newsreels. They knew the rhythm of this moment, the dangerous choreography about to unfold. A police canine, sculpted by relentless training into a creature of unwavering obedience, stood poised to confront a man who, to every onlooker, seemed utterly defenseless against the inevitable. Yet Marcus stood unshaken, his face devoid of the panic that would seize most in his place. No frantic scramble for safety, no desperate pleas for mercy, no trace of the raw terror that an 80-pound German shepherd, muscles taut and ready to spring, would summon in anyone else. His gaze held a rare, unshakable calm, not the hollow stillness of surrender, nor the blank stare of defeat, but the steady composure of a man who'd faced far darker storms. This wasn't the fragility of a cornered soul. This was the quiet strength of someone whose spirit had been forged in the crucible of war, hardened in foxholes under relentless enemy fire, tempered by sleepless nights spent listening for the faintest rustle of approaching danger, and deepened by losses too profound to ever articulate to those who hadn't shared the unspoken bond of brothers in arms staring down death together. Marcus's heart beat steadily, though he felt the weight of every eye fixed on him. In his mind, the park faded, replaced by fleeting memories of distant battlefields, sand and smoke, the sharp crack of gunfire, the weight of a comrade's hand on his shoulder. Those moments had carved him into who he stood in as now, not fearless, but unafraid of fear itself. This moment, was just another trial, and he'd weathered too many to let it rattle the foundation of his hard-earned peace. He didn't see a beast trained to dominate. He saw a creature bound by duty, much like he once had been. And in that recognition, he found not dread, but a quiet resolve to meet whatever came next with the same dignity that had carried him through the chaos of war. Officer Riley, meanwhile, felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. His training screamed at him to act decisively, to reassert authority over the escalating tension. Sweat prickled at the back of his neck as he gripped Max's leash, his mind racing through protocols drilled into him over years on the force. He was ready to bark his questions again, this time with a sharper edge, laced with the unspoken warning that defiance would carry a price. But just as he drew breath to speak, Max, moments ago the picture of disciplined calm at his handler's side, tugged against the leash with a sudden, urgent force. Riley's stomach lurched. This wasn't the low, menacing growl the crowd expected. nor the bared teeth aggression of a dog primed to attack. Instead, Max let out a strange, high-pitched whine, a sound tinged with something Riley couldn't place. Eagerness, perhaps, or an inexplicable yearning that defied every rule in their training manual. Confusion flickered across Riley's face, his professional certainty crumbling. Max hadn't been given a command to engage, yet something had sparked a reaction that didn't align with the scenario Riley thought he understood. His eyes darted to the dog, searching for answers in the animal's taut frame. Max's ears twitched, his body leaning forward as if drawn by an invisible thread. Then, with a burst of powerful strides, Max surged toward Marcus, closing the gap between the police line and the lone veteran in seconds that stretched into an agonizing eternity for the onlookers. The crowd held its collective breath, hearts pounding as they braced for the collision everyone feared was coming. Some turned away, unable to watch. Others fumbled for their phones, driven by a grim impulse to capture what they assumed would be another heartbreaking clash between power and vulnerability. Riley's mind raced, his grip tightening on the leash as he prepared to yank Max back. His voice caught in his throat. He felt the weight of his responsibility, not just to control his partner, but to protect the man standing so eerily still in the face of what looked like certain harm. Doubt gnawed at him, a rare crack in the armor of his training. Had he misread the situation? Was Max acting on some cue he'd missed? The officer's pulse thundered, his thoughts a tangle of protocol and instinct, as he watched his dog charge toward what should have been a straightforward resolution. But in that fleeting space between expectation and reality, something extraordinary unfolded. Max, the formidable canine trained to neutralize threats with ruthless precision, came to an abrupt halt mere feet from Marcus. Not because Riley had called him back, nor because the leash had reached its limit, but because something deeper had stirred within the animal. Something older than the commands drilled into him, more primal than the rigid structure of obedience. Max stood close enough to strike, his powerful frame trembling not with aggression, but with a quiet, inexplicable recognition. His nose twitched, sifting through a cascade of scents undetectable to human senses. The faint echo of old battles clinging to Marcus's skin, the lingering traces of shared hardship, the invisible scars that marked one warrior's soul to another, transcending species or circumstance. The crowd, still braced for violence, began to murmur, their fear giving way to confusion. Marcus, unwavering, extended a hand, not in defense but in quiet invitation. His eyes, still calm, met Max's, and in that gaze passed a wordless understanding, a bridge built from the shared language of survival. Then, with a soft whine that carried more tenderness than anyone could have imagined from such a formidable creature, Max stepped forward. His movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as he pressed his muzzle against Marcus's outstretched hand. It wasn't the greeting of a predator to prey, but the gentle welcome of one who'd found a long-lost companion. The dog's tail gave a tentative wag, and he leaned into Marcus's touch, nuzzling as though reclaiming a bond forged in some distant, unspoken past. Riley stood frozen, his hands still clutching the leash, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of awe and disbelief rippling through them. Phones lowered, forgotten, as spectators tried to make sense of the scene. For Marcus, the moment was both surreal and grounding. The warmth of Max's breath against his hand stirred a flicker of memory, not of war but of quieter times, of loyalty and trust forged in the unlikeliest of places. He felt no triumph, only a deep, quiet gratitude for this unexpected connection, this reminder that even in a world quick to judge, some truths could still be felt rather than explained. Max, for his part, seemed to shed the weight of his training in that moment, his instincts guided not by commands, but by a deeper call. He sat at Marcus's feet, his massive frame relaxed, his eyes soft with something akin to recognition. The park, once charged with fear, now hummed with a fragile, hopeful stillness, a testament to the unspoken bond that had defied every expectation, reminding all who witnessed it that sometimes the heart sees what the eyes cannot. A fleeting, genuine smile softened the deep lines etched across Marcus's weathered face, a rare glimpse of warmth that hadn't surfaced in weeks of his solitary visits to the park. The expression felt foreign to him, like a long-forgotten melody stirring in his chest, a quiet joy that flickered through the guarded walls he'd built over years of being misjudged. His rough, calloused hand reached out with a tenderness that belied its strength, gently stroking the fur on Max's head. Each careful touch carried the weight of a man who knew what it was to be seen as a threat when all he sought was a moment of peace, a fleeting refuge from a world quick to label him. In that simple gesture, Marcus poured out an understanding forged in the fires of his own isolation, a silent acknowledgement of the dog's loyalty that seemed to mirror his own unspoken longing for connection. Around them, the park stood still, as if time itself had paused to bear witness to something extraordinary. The onlookers, a mix of joggers, families, and passersby, were rooted in place, their faces a canvas of disbelief and awe. What unfolded before them challenged every preconceived notion they held about people, about training, about the invisible walls society builds between souls. This was no longer just a tense encounter with law enforcement. It had blossomed into something far greater, something no one could have predicted. It was as if the universe had conspired to rewrite the script of this moment, turning a routine patrol into a profound testament to the power of recognition that cut through the noise of artificial divides. Smartphones slipped from pockets and purses, their screens catching the sunlight like petals unfurling in a spring breeze. Each click and recording captured not just the scene, but the raw astonishment painted across countless faces as people grappled with the weight of what they were witnessing. Among them stood a silver-haired journalist, her camera hanging limply at her side. She had come to the park expecting another story of conflict, another chapter in the endless saga of injustice she'd spent her career documenting. But now her eyes shimmered with something unexpected. Hope, blooming quietly in a heart that had braced for yet another tale of systemic failure. The air in the park shifted, palpable and electric, moving from a taut thread of tension to a gentle current of curiosity. Fear dissolved into a hushed reverence that settled over the crowd like morning mist, soft and enveloping, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Something profound was unfolding, something that defied the rigid frameworks of police protocols or the predictable outcomes of such encounters in modern America. Officers Riley, Dalton, and Matthews stood frozen, their usual confidence shattered like glass under the weight of this unforeseen moment. They were seasoned professionals, trained to read situations with precision, to maintain control no matter how chaotic the circumstances. But today, their own canine had rewritten the narrative, forcing them to see the world through a lens unclouded by their usual assumptions. Max, the loyal police dog, lay contentedly in Marcus' lap, his deep, trusting eyes fixed on the old man's face with a devotion typically reserved for family or lifelong friends. The connection between them was raw, unfiltered, a bond that spoke of something deeper than training or commands. Marcus's fingers moved with practiced ease, scratching behind Max's ears in a rhythm that hinted at a past life, perhaps one spent caring for military working dogs in the chaos of combat zones. The dog let out a soft, contented sigh, a sound that rippled through the silent park like a quiet proclamation of peace. It was a simple scene, yet it struck a chord deep within every onlooker, resonating with something ancient and universal, untouched by the prejudices and snap judgments that had clouded the air just moments before. This was recognition in its purest form, a moment of connection that transcended the barriers of rank, role, or expectation. Officer Barge Riley, his earlier authority now softened by uncertainty, took a hesitant step forward. "Max, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and a dawning realization that he might have misread the entire situation from the start. He knelt beside Marcus, his professional instincts urging him to call his partner back to duty, to restore the order of protocol. But Max remained steadfast, nestled against the veteran, unmoved by the commands that had once guided his every action. The dog's decision was rooted in something deeper, an instinct that no amount of training could override. It was as if Max had seen something in Marcus that no one else had, something that spoke to the dog's own sense of loyalty and truth. Marcus lifted his gaze to meet Riley's, that same gentle smile still illuminating his weathered features, like the first rays of dawn breaking through a stormy sky. There was no trace of resentment in his eyes, no judgment for the scrutiny he'd endured, no anger at the assumptions that had been cast upon him. Instead, there was only understanding, a quiet, hard-earned wisdom born from years of navigating a world that often saw him as something he was not. In that moment, Marcus embodied a grace that spoke of resilience, of someone who had walked through enough darkness to cherish any fleeting glimpse of light. In the quiet rustle of autumn leaves, Marcus Harris spoke with a voice that carried the weight of a lifetime weathered by sacrifice. His words, soft yet deliberate, seemed to drift like a warm breeze, each syllable heavy with meaning forged in decades of service. He had seen storms, both literal and figurative, endured trials that most could never fathom, and carried the scars of a life dedicated to ideals larger than himself. His eyes, steady and patient, held a depth that spoke of silent endurance, a kind of resilience that didn't demand recognition, but quietly commanded it. To Marcus, peace wasn't an abstract concept. It was a hard-won treasure, one he recognized instantly in someone who had weathered similar tempests. Riley, the young police officer standing before him, felt the ground shift beneath his feet. For the first time since their tense encounter began, he truly saw Marcus, not as a potential threat, not as a figure to be categorized or dismissed, but as a man. His gaze fell on the older man's hands, etched with scars that told stories of battles fought and burdens borne. Each mark was a chapter in a life of service, a map of sacrifice that Riley, in his haste, had overlooked. Behind Marcus's calm demeanor, Riley glimpsed a weariness that wasn't weakness, but the residue of years spent carrying the weight of duty. The dignity radiating from Marcus struck Riley like a blow to his conscience, sharp and undeniable. This man was a veteran, a Marine, someone who had lived the very oath Riley had sworn to uphold as a police officer, to serve and protect. The irony was suffocating. Here he was, a guardian of the public, confronting a man who had already given everything for the same principles Riley claimed to represent. The realization churned in Riley's chest, a mix of shame and awakening. He had approached Marcus with the lens of assumption, his judgment clouded by preconceptions that now felt embarrassingly shallow. His fellow officers, Dalton and Matthews, were beginning to sense it too. Their steps slowed as they approached, their earlier suspicion melting into something softer, curiosity tinged with respect, and a trace of guilt for what they had almost done. The arrogance that had fueled their initial confrontation was unraveling, replaced by the dawning awareness of a truth they should have seen from the start. They hadn't just misjudged Marcus, they had failed to see him at all. Riley drew a deep breath, the air heavy with the weight of his newfound clarity. When he spoke, his voice was stripped of the defensive edge that had colored his earlier words. There was no trace of the authority he had wielded like a shield. Instead, his tone carried the raw sincerity of someone who had just glimpsed their own flaws. "Mr. Harris," he said, meeting Marcus's gaze with a respect that felt long overdue, "we owe you an apology. We got this wrong, completely wrong. We saw what we thought we knew, not what was standing in front of us." His words hung in the air, heavy with humility. Behind him, Dalton and Matthews nodded, their faces mirroring Riley's mix of regret and admiration. They were public servants, yes, but in this moment, they were students, learning a lesson they hadn't realized they needed. Dalton stepped forward, his hand extended not out of obligation, but with a sincerity that transcended protocol. "We want to thank you, sir," he said, his voice steady but warm. "Thank you for your service to this country, and thank you for reminding us of something we should have known but somehow forgot." Marcus clasped Dalton's hand, his grip gentle but firm, a silent gesture of forgiveness and understanding. It was a handshake that spoke of bridges being built, of walls crumbling between communities that had too often stood divided. Matthews, who had been the most guarded of the three, approached Marcus with a newfound reverence that softened his hardened exterior. He knelt briefly to stroke the head of Marcus's dog, Max, his eyes lifting to meet Marcus's with a look of quiet awe. "Our K9 knew better than we did," he admitted, a genuine smile breaking across his face, thawing the sternness that had defined him moments before. "Sometimes animals see what we miss when we're too busy assuming instead of looking." Max, loyal and unflinching, had sensed what the officers hadn't, a truth that transcended uniforms and preconceptions. Word of the encounter spread through Lafayette Park like a spark catching in dry grass. The onlookers, who had initially watched with a mix of fear and curiosity, began to clap, tentatively at first, Then with growing conviction, the sound swelled, rolling across the park like thunder across open plains. This wasn't applause for a spectacle. It was a collective recognition of a moment where understanding had triumphed over prejudice, where compassion had softened the edges of confrontation. The air buzzed with the quiet power of a shared awakening, a reminder that even in a divided world, there was still room for connection, for seeing one another not as strangers, but as bearers of shared humanity. In a world often fractured by fear and quick judgments, a quiet victory unfolded in a sun-dappled park where humanity triumphed over misunderstanding. A silver-haired journalist, her camera a silent witness to countless stories, lifted her lens once more. This time, she wasn't chasing the chaos of conflict or the tension of clashing ideals. Instead, her focus settled on Marcus Harris, a soft-spoken veteran whose weathered hands cradled a canine named Max, nestled in his lap like a living testament to peace. Marcus's eyes, etched with the weight of battles long past, softened as he stroked Max's fur, his heart finding solace in the dog's steady warmth. For him, Max wasn't just a companion, but a mirror of resilience, a creature who understood loyalty and trust in ways words could never capture. The journalist's shutter clicked, freezing moments that felt like whispers of hope. She captured police officers standing nearby, their postures relaxed, their faces open, not issuing orders or wielding authority, but listening. These men and women, once symbols of division in the eyes of some, were learning to see beyond their badges, to hear beyond their assumptions. Their presence wasn't fleeting. They lingered, drawn to the quiet wisdom of Marcus's voice. They sat on a nearby bench, their uniforms blending into the everyday rhythm of the park, as Marcus shared stories not of war's scars or the jagged edges of trauma, but of life's quieter struggles. He spoke of returning to a civilian world that often felt foreign, of navigating the unspoken expectations of a society quick to judge a man by his worn jacket or solitary demeanor. His words carried no bitterness, only a gentle plea for understanding, a reminder that every person carries a story deeper than their surface. Around them, park visitors moved with a newfound ease, their steps lighter, their glances softer. The air, once heavy with unspoken fears and invisible walls, now hummed with possibility. Strangers who might have once passed each other with guarded eyes now exchanged nods, even smiles, as if Marcus and Max had unlocked a shared language of hope. The journalist's lens caught it all. A child pausing to pet Max, her laughter bright against the rustle of leaves. An elderly couple watching from a distance, their hands clasped, their faces lit with quiet pride in a community knitting itself back together. For these people, the park was no longer a place of division, but a canvas of connection, painted with small acts of courage and compassion. Marcus's stories flowed like a steady stream, each one a bridge between his heart and those who listen. He spoke of Max, whose instincts were unclouded by prejudice, whose trust was earned not through appearances but through kindness. Max, with his soulful eyes and unwavering loyalty, had become more than a dog. He was a teacher, showing everyone that the purest connections were often those came from the simplest beings. The officers nodded, their own assumptions unraveling as they saw Marcus not as a stranger or a stereotype, but as a man whose dignity shone through his quiet strength. One officer, a young woman with a hesitant smile, thought of her own family, of the misunderstandings that had once strained their bonds. She felt a pang gratefulness for this moment, for this chance at the chance to see this world through the wider lens. The journalist, her heart swelling with the weight this story of what it was witnessed, knew that this story was more than just a single afternoon in a park. It was about a testament to truth, the power of looking beyond the surface, about listening with an empathy rather than a judgment. Marcus, who had become a solitary figure who blended into this park's shadows, had become a beacon, his story radiating hope that everyone who saw it could see it unfold. Through Max's gentle presence, he had shown everyone that kindness still thrived, existed in that connection that could bridge any divide, whether it was between species or backgrounds or beliefs. The journalist's photographs would carry far beyond this park, each frame a reminder that this single act could shift an entire perspective, community's perspective. In those quiet moments when the sun dipped lower and cast a golden light across this grass, this park seemed to hold this breath, savoring this rare beauty of all hearts meeting across all those divides. Marcus's voice, steady and warm, continued to weave its magic spell, reminding everyone that this most profound lesson often came not from grand gestures, but from this stillness of a shared understanding. His story, carried forward by Max's unwavering trust, proved this story's lived in every person, waiting to be seen by those who were willing to look with an open hearts.